midnight screams.
Ever since my priest broke the fifth commandment, my church has been cursed. The greatest commandment in the Bible is to love God with all your heart. The second greatest commandment is to love one another. After that, it's a bit of a free-for-all. But I'd probably give third place to the fifth of the 10 Commandments. Do not murder. 6 months ago, our pastor, Zach, broke the fifth commandment. We loved God with the fullness of our hearts. We cared for the sick, the poor, the needy. We ran soup kitchens out of the back of our church, put on daycares for single moms, read to the elderly. But because Zach broke the fifth commandment, it was as if our church had been cursed. Sometimes, when I was in church on my own, it felt as if God had abandoned the building, and something dark and hungry had taken his place. 6 months ago, after a Sunday evening service, Zach was locking up the church. He was on his own, had stayed late to finish preparing a midweek Bible study. Fiddling with the key in the lock, he'd felt someone tap him on the shoulder. He turned around, expecting to see someone from our congregation, perhaps Martha, who had a terrible habit of leaving her Bible under her seat. Instead, he saw a man he'd never met before. So close, Zach could feel his stinking breath on his forehead. Tall but wiry, in clothes that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years, looked like he was in his 60s. Teeth all janky, foaming at the mouth. Wild eyes, like the eyes of a rabid animal, but focused, unblinking, fixed on him. And before Zach even knew what was happening, the man had handed him a knife. Zach says that the blade was already covered in blood, although no one ever figured out where the blood came from. Zach later told us that he took a step back towards the church, pressed himself against the door, the knife in his hands. He said that there was no way he could have stopped what happened, couldn't have, stopped the man from stepping forwards, and stepping forwards again, and again, and again, until Zach's hand was pressed against the man's stomach and the man's lips were stained red. Zach was a good person. He did all he could for the man. But the man bled out on the church's welcome mat. Zach said that after he called for an ambulance, he prayed for him. While he prayed, the man never broke eye contact. Zach told us that he believed the man actually smiled, grinned, before he died. We found out the next morning. The next few months were some of the worst our church ever faced. Zach was arrested, questioned by the police. I even had to lead the midweek Bible study and preach my first sermon. The church's CCTV saved Zach, proved that there really wasn't much that Zach could have done. I told him exactly that when I sat with him one night, smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey on his porch. I can remember how badly his hands were shaking, how pale his face was. "You're a good man, Zach," I told him. We talked about the act of killing in the Bible, the righteous war of the Israelites as they invaded Canaan, the slaughtering of the residents of Jericho, holy destruction. But something about Zach's actions didn't feel righteous. Deep down, I knew he'd done something terrible that night. He'd broken the fifth commandment. "You're a good man," I told him, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just smoked and drank until the sun began to rise. The size of our congregation shrank drastically. We'd originally had around 130 weekly attendees, but within the course of a month, it'd gone down to about 60. Mostly older people, although a few families stayed. It took about that long for the Holy Spirit to leave that place, for the darkness to set in. It was a Tuesday night during our kids group. Only 3 kids were there that week, and it was just me and my wife running the night. We told them the story of Daniel in the den of lions, made them popcorn and put on a film, turned the lights off, but one of the kids wasn't interested. Ola, 6 years old. Tiny little thing, always quiet. During the film, she got out of her chair, wandered off. I followed her, retreating from the brightness of the projector screen as she walked towards the back left corner of the room. She stopped about 5 feet away from it, pitch black. Could barely see anything at all, but Ola lifted up her hand, as if she was reaching out for something. "You're missing the movie," I said, but Ola didn't respond. Kept her hand held up, her palm now pointing at the ceiling. "Ola," I said, and she turned her head to look at me. "I'm talking," she told me, and then she turned to face the darkness again. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, but I swear that this corner was darker than anywhere else in the room. Blackout blinds, dark and cold, like really, ridiculously cold. "Who are you talking to?" I asked her. She didn't answer, wasn't even paying attention to me, but she stumbled back a few steps. "I don't want to do that," she said. And then she dropped her hand to her side. Suddenly, I didn't feel so cold, and the corner didn't look quite as dark. Ola span on her heels, ran back to her chair at the front of the church, scooped up a handful of popcorn from her bowl, as if nothing had happened. I talked to my wife about it on the way back from church. She thought it was nothing. Spoke to Zach about it the next day. He took me a bit too seriously, even put out his cigarette. "Pray," he told me. "When the whole world seems dark, that's when you should pray." Stamped out his cigarette with the heel of his boot. Weeks passed, nothing too strange to report, except for a feeling. A feeling that things weren't quite right. A feeling that I shouldn't be in the church on my own after dark. A feeling like something lurked behind every door, and a few odd stories. Things like, the projector turned itself off in the middle of a service, so we had to resort to getting out a stack of old hymn books. We turned up for our midweek Bible study to find a dead mouse next to the pulpit. Put out mouse traps all over the place, but never found any more. Ola told her parents that she'd seen a black goat roaming around the fields behind the church, with chains wrapped around its horns. Martha left her Bible underneath her chair one night, but when she came to pick it up on the Monday morning, she found that it had been left in front of the entrance. These were the kind of stories you might tell around a campfire to freak out a few kids, but we didn't take it too seriously. We had too much on our plates already. Zach's drinking habit was getting out of hand, and his sermons were becoming increasingly incomprehensible. Our church was dwindling in size. Teenagers were filming TikToks in front of the building, calling it the murder church. It's not as if we were moving on from what had happened. It was impossible to move on. But we really did believe that God would one day come back to this building, would make it his home again. I first realized that he was well and truly gone 2 months ago. Tuesday night, kids group. Me, my wife, Ola, and 2 other girls. No one else in the church. Zach was letting us use his office, which was upstairs in the church, next to the sports hall. We were leading a Bible study on David and Goliath, and my wife and I were far more interested than the girls were. About 30 minutes into the study, Ola told my wife that she needed to go to the toilet. My wife offered to escort her. Ola turned her down, and then my wife insisted, so off they went together, leaving me and the 2 girls alone. Zach's office is a small room, lined with tall bookcases, thousands of old Bible, commentaries, a big desk next to the window, embroidered with coffee rings, a giant lamp as the main source of light, some bean bags for any casual meetings. Those are what we were sat on that night. And a thick, heavy door. The kind of door you'd have to shove to open. Beyond the door, the staircase. The girls and I were waiting for my wife and Ola to return when we heard the footsteps. Right at the bottom of the stairs, a dense thud, as if someone had put all of their weight into their foot. There was a long moment of silence, just long enough that I thought I'd imagined it. Then, thud. 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 Faster now, but just as firm, just as heavy, working their way up the stairs. There are 14 stairs that lead to Zach's office and the sports hall. Whoever was coming up these stairs in that moment was making short work of them. The girls pulled each other close. I could see how terrified they were. To be honest, even though I thought it was probably just my wife playing a prank on me, I was pretty freaked out too. And those footsteps were getting closer. Thud, thud, thud. Only, as they were getting closer, it was, if they were becoming quieter, lighter, softer, as if whatever was making its way up the stairs had paws or hooves. And there was a new sound, something I could just about make out, the rattling of chains. The footsteps continued once whoever or whatever this was had reached the top of the stairs. They stopped right outside the door. Then there was silence. "Who's there?" I called out. "Ruth? Is that you?" No answer. "Ruth?" The door handle turned, kept turning, twisted unnaturally far, and then the door slowly swung open. This was a heavy door, remember, but the door opened smoothly, without resistance. On the other side, all I could see was darkness. Then I heard the scream, a heart-wrenching, terrified scream. Somewhere deep within the church, my wife, Ruth. Instinct kicked in. Suddenly, I didn't give a crap about whatever was lurking in the darkness. I knew that my wife was in danger, and I needed to get to her. So I told the girls to stay in Zach's office, took a deep breath, and then flung myself out of the room. No one was in the hallway, although I felt as if I was being watched from all sides. But I didn't have time to dwell on that. I threw myself down the stairs, ran towards the restrooms, found my wife stood outside the ladies, bawling her eyes out, her skin prickled with goosebumps. I couldn't get a word out of her, except for that she didn't know where Ola was. I knew exactly where she'd be. I found her stood near the back corner of the church main hall, the corner a black abyss leaking out into the room. Ola was silent, her hands stretched out into the shadows. "I don't want to," she said again. And then, out of the shadows, a hand reached out and touched hers. A big hand, a man's hand. I just about stopped myself from screaming, and I was glad that I did, because a moment later, the man in the corner stepped out of the darkness and revealed himself. Zach, clearly drunk, with an unlit cigarette hanging out of his mouth. "You should get back to your Bible study," he told Ola, slurring his words. Ola didn't go back to her study. I called her parents, called the other girls' parents too. I also called the rest of the church's elders, and I recommended that Zach should be encouraged to take a sabbatical. I even drove him to the airport that weekend. We didn't say a word to one another, but Zach didn't look well. He hadn't shaved in a while, and he definitely hadn't washed. After he took his suitcase out of the bunk of my car, I prayed for him and sent him on his way. It took until that night for my wife to tell me what had happened to her in the restroom. She didn't tell me much. She was far too embarrassed to elaborate. But what she did say is that when she left her toilet stall, she saw something stood in the doorway. A black goat, about as big as a wolf, with chains wrapped around its horns, staring right at her. We stopped going to church after that. I hadn't given up on God, certainly hadn't turned away from my faith, but I definitely distanced myself from my church. I wanted nothing to do with it, didn't want to talk about it. I even ignored Zach's texts, the few attempts at calls that he made. I'm ashamed to say that I blocked his number. When I heard from an elder last week that Zach hadn't returned from his sabbatical, I didn't think much of it. I had too much going on in my own life. Ruth and I both weren't sleeping well, and we were arguing more. She clearly couldn't stop thinking about that night, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. To be honest, we'd been working hard to put this chapter of our lives behind us. But that changed 2 nights ago. I received a phone call from Ola's mom. Almost didn't pick up, and I kind of wish that I hadn't. She had a story to tell me, through tears and panic and stress. Because 2 nights ago, Ola had been at the kids' group, and one of the elders had found her stood in that dark corner of the church, facing the shadows, with her hand stretched out. "I don't want to," she'd said. Then a man's hand had reached out to touch hers, only this hand had been holding a knife, already slick with blood, a knife that settled in Ola's open palm. Apparently, Ola stood dead still as the man walked out of the shadows, a tall and wiry man with dirty clothes and a stinking breath. A man who walked straight into the blade, without hesitation. Apparently Zach died with a big grin on his face, and with eyes as wild as an animal's. I hung up the phone, blocked Ola's number, didn't tell my wife. Last night, I woke up to find Zach sat at the end of my bed. His face was thick with sweat, his eyes blazing with fury, and there was a lit cigarette hanging out of his mouth. In the doorway, I saw a black goat, almost as large as a man, with chains wrapped around its horns. In Zach's right hand I saw that he gripped a knife, held out towards me. "I don't want it," I thought, and he smiled in response. And then he was gone, as if he'd never been there. My room was empty, and Ruth was still fast asleep. But I've written this story down because I want someone to know that if I ever break the 5th commandment, it won't be out of choice. I've also written this down because I want someone to pray for me. The whole world seems dark, and I need prayer. It didn't work for Zach, but maybe it will work for me. Every Halloween, the Pumpkin Father claims a soul. This year, I think he is coming for me. I used to think the story was fake, just a rumor to keep kids away from the old farmhouse. I had never seen anything myself, not until last year when it all happened, not until I made a mistake, the worst mistake in my life, when I wrecked that pumpkin. It was an accident, but it didn't matter. He did not care. I barely survived the nightmare of our first encounter, and now I think he is coming for me again. To start, I should say, my name is Jake, and I used to live in a small town in Iowa. I won't say where for both privacy reasons and to keep people well away from that place at this time of year especially. My town has a disturbing urban legend about a strange figure, the Pumpkin Father. They say the Pumpkin Father first appeared here in 1967, after old Farmer Keller's family disappeared. The man went mad with grief and lost his mind after his wife and children died in a house. Fire. It was tragic, but what happened after was where's got more disturbing. They say he began to carve faces into pumpkins, not the cheerful, grinning Halloween kinds, but twisted, anguished expressions that looked too real to be made by human hands. People claimed the faces resembled his lost children. Worst of all were the stories of how he would abduct people from town, sever their heads, and place his pumpkin family jack-o'-lanterns on them to join his twisted surrogate family. I remember hearing the stories as a kid, How every year on the anniversary of the fire, one person would disappear from town, always someone who had damaged one of the Pumpkin Father's creations. The police called them runaways or accidents, but everyone suspected something worse. People would say that pumpkins would appear on the victims' porches the night before. I never paid much attention to the warnings. Not until last year, in October, right near Halloween. Not until I accidentally ran over that pumpkin on the edge of Keller's property on a dare. My friend Emily and I were driving home and passed the old farmhouse. Something distracted me from where I was going and I missed it. It was a jack-o'-lantern right on the edge of the road, just outside the driveway of the infamous farmhouse. I stopped the car and got out to check. When I looked closer, the side of the pumpkin fell in further. But it didn't just break, it seemed to scream. A sound like wind that somehow formed into a child's wail after a moment. Emily heard it too. Her face went white, and we both knew we had made a huge mistake. When we turned around, we saw something, or someone. It was a tall, impossibly thin figure standing at the edge of Keller's property, silhouetted against the dying sun. Its head was misshapen, bulbous. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Emily. She nodded, her fingers digging into my arm. "Let's get out of here. We didn't talk about it after." That? Not until the pumpkins appeared soon after. I was heading home after my late shift at the gas station, the October wind biting through my jacket. The streetlights cast long shadows, and most of the shops were already dark, except for the seasonal displays of pumpkins and cornstalks. That's when I noticed it. One of the pumpkins had been freshly carved, its jagged smile and triangular eyes seeming to follow me as I walked past. I wouldn't have thought anything of it if not for what was carved into the fence behind it. "Family grows when seeds are sown." The same words had been scrawled in faded paint on the old Keller barn by people trying to scare everyone each year. But seeing it now, a chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I quickened my pace, keeping my head down. The whole way home, I felt eyes on my back. Twice I spun around, certain I'd catch someone following me, but the street remained empty, just the wind stirring dead leaves across, the pavement and the distant sound of a train whistle. When I got home, there was a pumpkin on my porch. I almost dropped my keys. The pumpkin had been carved with a face so detailed, so precise, it looked like Emily. The same gentle curve of her cheek, the slight upturn of her nose, even the small scar above her right eyebrow from when we were kids. The craftsmanship was impossible. No human hands could capture a likeness that perfect. But there it was. Emily's face staring back at me with hollow eyes that somehow held recognition. I called her immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Jake? What's wrong?" Her voice was cut off by a sudden crash, followed by the sound of breaking glass. "Emily?" I called out, panic rising in my throat. "Emily, are you there?" For a moment, all I heard was shuffling. Then Emily's voice returned, pitched high with terror. "Jake, there's someone in my house," she whispered. I think it's him. The pumpkin on my windowsill. It has your face." "I'm calling the police," I said, already moving toward my door. "Just hide. I'll—" A scream tore through the phone, cutting off abruptly. Then nothing. "Emily!" I shouted into the phone. The line was dead. I couldn't believe it, but the call to 911 was not connecting. It just kept ringing. No one was answering to help. I grabbed my car keys and sprinted outside, nearly tripping over the pumpkin with Emily's face. In my panic, I kicked it aside, watching as it rolled down the steps and split open on the sidewalk. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw something red and wet inside, not pumpkin flesh, but something else, something that shouldn't have been there. The drive to Emily's house took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. I screeched to a halt outside Emily's house, the headlights illuminating her front door hanging open. The porch light flickered, casting distorted shadows across the yard. My heart pounded in my chest as I killed the engine and stumbled out of the car. "Emily!" I shouted, rushing toward the house. The moment I crossed the threshold, I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, almost viscous, carrying the cloying scent of rotting vegetation and something else, something metallic and sharp. Glass crunched beneath my shoes as I moved through the darkened living room. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant ticking of a clock. "Emily?" I called again, my voice sounding small and afraid. I fumbled for the light switch, flicking it on. What I saw made my blood run cold. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, pictures knocked from walls. But it was the trail leading down the hallway that made me freeze. Pumpkin seeds. Hundreds of them, scattered across the floor like breadcrumbs, glistening wet with something that wasn't water. I followed the trail, each step forward with growing dread, my hand sliding along the wall for support. The hallway seemed to stretch and distort, shadows playing tricks with my vision. The seeds led straight to Emily's bedroom. The door was ajar, moonlight spilling through her window onto the hardwood floor. I pushed the door open wider with trembling fingers. Emily's room was empty, but her window had been shattered from the inside out, glass fragments glittering on the carpet like fallen stars. On her bed lay a single, perfectly carved pumpkin. Not with Emily's face this time, but mine. My own face stared back at me, rendered with such perfect detail that it might have been a mirror except for the expression. The carved likeness wore a look of pure terror, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with horror. And that's when I saw it. The note. Tucked beneath the pumpkin, written on yellowed paper in handwriting that looked decades old. "The seed is planted. The harvest approaches. Family waits at home." My hands shook as I read the words over and over. Home. He meant Keller's farm. A sudden noise behind me made me whirl around, but it was too late. Something hard struck the back of my head, and pain exploded across my skull. I caught a glimpse of a tall, impossibly thin silhouette, the unmistakable bulbous head glowing faintly in the darkness. The pumpkin face looked almost sad as I crumpled to the floor, darkness rushing in from all sides. I thought I was dead. Maybe I should have been. When I came to, the throbbing in my head was unbearable. The air was thick with a smell of earth and decay. I tried to move, but my limbs wouldn't respond. Slowly, painfully, I opened my eyes to find myself lying on cold dirt in near darkness. Only a faint orange glow illuminated my surroundings, a root cellar of some kind, with rough wooden beams overhead and earthen walls. Keller's farm. I was at Keller's farm. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar. A soft whimpering came from somewhere to my left. I turned my head, wincing at the stab of pain. And there was Emily. She was bound with rough twine, her clothes torn, a trickle of dried blood running down her forehead. Her eyes widened when she saw me, Jake, she rasped. We need to get out. He's. A door creaked open somewhere above us, and heavy footsteps thudded on wooden stairs. Emily fell silent, trembling. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs were leaden, unresponsive. The pumpkin father descended into view, his unnaturally tall frame hunched beneath the low ceiling. His jack-o'-lantern head glowed from within, casting flickering light across the cellar. The carved face was crude, a mockery of human features with jagged teeth and hollow eyes that somehow still managed to convey emotion. Right now, that emotion looked like joy. Somewhere beneath the terrible pumpkin helm, it looked like the vestiges of terribly burnt skin and a human face beneath. Family, he said, his voice like dried leaves scraping against wood. Family waits. He moved toward us with unnatural grace, bending down to grasp Emily by her bound arms. She screamed and thrashed against his grip, but he lifted her effortlessly. Don't touch her! I tried to scream, but it was no use, and he carried her upstairs. I looked around for some means of escape. I struggled against my bonds, fueled by desperation. The coarse rope bit into my wrists as I twisted and pulled, feeling the skin tear beneath. A warm trickle of blood ran down my fingers, making the rope slick. With one final, painful wrench, my right hand slipped free. Then I had an idea. My pocket, my phone. Was it still there? I patted frantically at my jeans, nearly sobbing with relief when I felt the rectangular shape. With shaking fingers, I pulled out my phone, squinting against the screen's harsh light. My heart sank when I saw no signal bars, but I desperately dialed 911 anyway. To my shock, it connected. 911? What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was like water in the desert. Please help, I whispered, terrified the pumpkin father would hear. We're at the old Keller farm. He's going to kill us. Please hurry. Send someone. Anyone. Sir, stay calm. We will send help right away. Please stay on the line and... The phone fell out of my hand, and I saw the pumpkin father had come back in. He grabbed me and hoisted me over his shoulder, and I was carried upstairs to a dining room where a horrible sight awaited. There were desiccated old bodies strewn around a table, each wearing leering pumpkin heads carved meticulously with the faces of what was once living people. I saw our own pumpkins sitting on the table, facing empty chairs. I was shoved into place and stared at my own visage carved into the pumpkin closest to me, and I saw Emily sitting across the table in a similar situation. The pumpkin father's hand pressed down on my shoulder, pinning me to the chair with inhuman strength. I struggled, but it was like fighting against iron bars. The table before us was set with rotting food on ancient plates, a mockery of a family dinner. Welcome home, the pumpkin father rasped, his voice like autumn leaves skittering across a grave. Family dinner, family forever. I looked at Emily, tears streaming down her face as she fought against her restraints. The pumpkin faces around us seemed to watch with hollow amusement, their carved expressions frozen. The pumpkin father moved behind Emily, his grotesque jack-o'-lantern head tilting as if in consideration. From beneath his tattered coat, he produced a rusted carving knife, its edge gleaming dully in the flickering light. Time to become family. First we must prepare, he said, his voice crackling like burning leaves. The head must be emptied before it can be filled with new light, he whispered, while raising the blade to Emily's throat. Time to wear your face. No. I screamed, thrashing against my restraints. Emily's eyes met mine. silent goodbye in them that tore my heart to shreds. The pumpkin father pressed the knife against her skin, drawing a thin line of blood. I watched in horror as a single drop rolled down her neck, staining her collar crimson. I had no idea what to do. I looked on in hopeless terror and thought we were going to die there. Suddenly, the front door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, painting the grotesque scene in alternating colors. "Police! Come out with your hands on your head!" An officer's voice thundered through the farmhouse. The pumpkin father's head swiveled unnaturally toward the sound, the carved grin somehow twisting into a snarl. In that moment of distraction, I lunged forward with all my might. The chair toppled with me still half bound to it, but I managed to throw my weight into the pumpkin father's legs. He staggered, the knife slicing air instead of Emily's throat. "Jake!" Emily screamed as the pumpkin. Father regained his balance and turned toward me, his pumpkin head burning with an unholy light. A police officer burst into the dining room, gun drawn and aiming at the knife, wielding pumpkin-headed monstrosity. "Drop the weapon! Now!" The pumpkin father tilted his head, regarding the officer like a curious child studying an insect before crushing it. The orange glow within his hollowed head pulsed brighter, casting long, distorted shadows across the macabre dining room. "Not family," the pumpkin father rasped, his voice like wind through a graveyard. "Intruder." Before the officer could react, the pumpkin father lunged with inhuman speed, his elongated limbs propelling him across the room. I heard the gunfire once, twice. The rounds struck the monstrous figure, and the pumpkin father reeled but did not fall. A high-pitched, inhuman shriek filled the room as the bullets tore through the pumpkin father's form. The orange glow within his head flickered wildly, like a flame caught in a sudden draft. The knife clattered to the floor as he stumbled backward, his elongated limbs jerking spasmodically. "Not time," he hissed, black ichor oozing from the wounds in his chest. "Not yet." More officers poured into the room, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. The pumpkin father's head swiveled, and he shrieked and then was gone. He left the twisted remnants of his pumpkin family behind, and we had been spared the fate of joining them. It was a Halloween we would never forget, for all the wrong reasons. In the aftermath of that nightmare, I left my hometown. I managed to save up enough to just go wherever I could afford to move. Anywhere was better than there. I did not know if the pumpkin father was still out there, still alive, but I would not stay and find out. Things have been all right since then, but now that almost an entire year has passed, it's happening again. Even now it's Hallows' Eve, and when I got home from work tonight, I found something terrifying. I knew it was wrong immediately. I had not made a jack-o'-lantern this year, and I might not ever make another one. Yet there it was on my front porch, a pumpkin with a face, my face. Not just any generic carving, but a perfect likeness down to the small scar above my right eyebrow. The craftsmanship was unmistakable, those same impossible details that only one entity could create. I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, thinking to call Emily. We'd promised to keep in touch, to warn each other if anything ever happened. That was just a few minutes ago. She didn't answer. I left a message and hope to God she is all right. I am panicking and I don't know what I can do. It can't be happening again. Please, if you are reading this, be careful. He is still out there, still looking for people to add to his twisted family. I made a mistake, but next time it could be you. I hope, for your sake, you never destroy one of his creations and never see him yourself. I am going to lock my door, my windows, and barricade myself in my room, then call the police. I hope they get here soon. They won't believe me, but it will make me feel a bit safer tonight, at least for a while. I got my daughter a new toy called Feed Me Phoebe, single mother here, with a daughter that just turned 4 last week. During mornings, she likes to watch TV before I leave work and the babysitter comes over. She sits there, gobbling down cereal and occasionally babbling nonsense. It's adorable, really. To say we're tight on money right now is an understatement. I can barely afford to keep the lights on, but every time I grimace at a new bill in the mail, there she is to pull me out of my storm, smiling, laughing, my little ball of sunshine. She doesn't have many toys, not new ones at least. I typically end up buying her used toys from a messy aisle at Goodwill, but a couple days ago, a commercial popped up on TV. I was in the kitchen cooking breakfast when I heard her yelling for me to come to the living room. I ran out, initially thinking something was wrong before I saw her pointing at the TV excitedly, spoon forgotten on the floor. "Mommy, look!" Commercial showed several children talking to a doll, feeding it fake food, dressing it up. I watched for about 20 seconds before it ended, and a choir of children sang, "We love Feed Me Phoebe." I want that toy. I want that toy. "Mommy, please?" she begged, standing up and practically bouncing on her heels. The toy was slightly high technology given its AI voice recognition feature, making it around $25. I really didn't have much money to spend, but God, those eyes of hers. And I was getting paid that day. I knelt down, pulling her close, the scent of maple syrup and her hair filling my nose. "Phoebe, huh?" I murmured, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. Her eyes, wide and hopeful, stared back at me. They were the same deep brown as mine, but held a sparkle I sometimes felt I'd lost somewhere along the way. "Yes, she talks, Mommy, and I can feed her. Please, please, please?" My heart ached. $25 might as well have been faith. 2,500 right now. But then I remembered once again. Today was payday. It wouldn't be much after bills, but maybe, just maybe. I hummed, trying to sound thoughtful rather than terrified of my bank balance. "She looks like a very special doll, Sweet Pea. Mommy has to go to work now, but I'll think about it, okay? It's a big decision for a talking doll." I gave her a squeeze, hoping the hesitation in my voice wasn't too obvious. I saw the slight flicker of disappointment, but then her face brightened. "You'll think about it? Really? Really, really," I confirmed, kissing the top of her head. "Now, let's get you finished with breakfast before Miss Carroll gets here, all right?" She nodded, a determined little bounce in her step as she went back to her bowl, though I noticed her eyes kept drifting back to the now empty screen where Phoebe had been just moments before. I watched her for a moment, a fierce love swelling in my chest. If I could give her the moon, I would. For now, I'd settle for seeing if I could swing a talking doll. The morning rush was a blur after that. A quick hug for my daughter, a rushed handover with Miss Carroll, and then I was out the door, the chill morning air doing little to cool the financial anxieties swirling in my mind. The image of those hopeful brown eyes, though, stayed with me, a tiny, persistent tug on my conscience. It was just past noon when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another goddamn work email. but it was a text from Miss Carroll. "Hey, quick update. Your little one is adorable as ever, but she's been going on and on about Feed Me Phoebe since you left. I think you might have a new mission on your hands." I smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Mission accepted, Miss Carroll. Mission accepted." The rest of the workday crawled by, each minute ticking slower than the last. My mind kept replaying the commercial, my daughter's beaming face, and Miss Carroll's text. When my shift finally ended, I practically flew out the door, making a beeline for the nearest Walmart. The toy aisle was a chaotic symphony of primary colors and plastic. I found the Feed Me Phoebe display, a towering wall of identical dolls, each packaged in a bright pink box. My heart did a little flutter kick of anxiety as I picked one up, the price tag staring back at me. $25. It was a significant chunk of what was left after rent and groceries. But then I imagined those wide, hopeful brown eyes, and, well, the doll was in my cart before I could second-guess myself. The drive home felt endless. I clutched the steering wheel, the pink box rattling softly in the passenger seat, a strange mix of dread and anticipation churning in my stomach. When I finally pulled into our driveway, my daughter was already peeking through the living room window, her face lighting up the moment she saw my car. "Mommy's home!" she shrieked, Miss Carroll's gentle laughter following her as she burst out the front door. I met her halfway, kneeling down and pulling the box from behind my back. Her eyes went wide, then impossibly wider. A gasp escaped her lips, and she threw her arms around my neck, squeezing so tight I almost lost my breath. "Oh my gosh! Phoebe, you got her! You really got her!" Her joy was infectious, washing away the last vestiges of my financial worry. We spent the next hour on the living room floor. She ripped open the box with an enthusiasm that belied her small size, carefully pulling out the doll. Phoebe had big, blue eyes, rosy cheeks, and a perpetually cheerful smile. She came with a tiny plastic bottle and a spoon. "Say something, Phoebe," my daughter commanded, holding the doll up. Phoebe blinked her big eyes. "Hello, I'm Phoebe. What's your name?" Her sweet, synthesized voice chirped. My daughter giggled, a sound that was pure, music to my ears. "I'm Fiona, but Mommy calls me Fifi." I leaned in, ruffling her hair. "That's right, Sweet Pea. You know, Phoebe kind of sounds like Fifi, doesn't it?" I winked. She considered this, then nodded eagerly. "It does." The rest of the evening was a blur of feeding Phoebe imaginary food, dressing her in her tiny outfit, and listening to her repeat programmed phrases. My daughter was utterly enchanted. It was worth every penny, I decided, watching her pure, unadulterated happiness. Bedtime came, and my daughter, exhausted but still buzzing with excitement, insisted Phoebe sleep right next to her. I tucked them both in, kissing her forehead. "Sleep tight, my little Fifi, and you too, Phoebe. Good night, Mommy," she mumbled, already drifting off. I closed her door almost all the way, leaving a sliver open for the nightlight to peek through. I went to the kitchen, tidying up, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I was just about to head to my own room when a faint, metallic whisper drifted from my daughter's room. I paused, listening. It was Phoebe's voice, but it sounded different. Not the cheerful, programmed tone from earlier. It was lower, slower, almost conspiratorial. "Fifi," the doll whispered, "do you ever get scared when Mommy leaves?" I cocked an eyebrow. That was a weird question. I crept closer to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence for a moment, then my daughter's sleepy, muffled voice. Sometimes. And what do you do then, Fifi? Phoebe's voice was unnervingly soft. Another pause. I wait for her to come back. But what if she doesn't come back? The doll asked, the words dripping with an unsettling sweetness. What if she goes away forever? My breath hitched in my throat. It's gotta be the program glitching or something. It's AI, after all. Maybe it's just veering off track. Many modern AIs do that. I walked in slowly, giving a nervous smile to my daughter, who looked a bit scared from the doll's question. I'm going to turn Phoebe off until the morning so you can get some sleep, okay, darling? I said softly. She nodded, too tired to protest. I flipped the off switch and tucked her in, giving her a tired kiss on the forehead before walking slowly out of the room, shutting the door with a soft click. I walked slowly to my own room, the soft click of Fiona's door echoing unnervingly in the quiet house. My mind was a whirlwind. What was that? I replayed Phoebe's chilling whispers. What if she goes away forever? What if it wasn't just a glitch, or the AI veering off track? It felt intentional. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I got into bed, but sleep was a distant dream. Every rustle of the sheets sounded like a whisper, every creak of the house like a metallic whirring. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, my heart thumping a restless rhythm. Was it just a faulty toy, or was there something more sinister at play? The image of Fiona's wide, scared eyes flashed in my mind. I chastised myself for buying such a thing, for letting my financial worries be overshadowed by a momentary indulgence. The minutes stretched into hours, each one heavier than the last, until finally, exhaustion, a heavy blanket, pulled me under. The alarm jolted me awake, its cheerful beeping a stark contrast to the lingering unease in my head. I felt groggy and unrested, a slight headache throbbing behind my eyes. I dragged myself out of bed, the memory of last night's incident still fresh. The house was quiet. Fiona must still be asleep. I padded to the kitchen, brewed coffee, and started packing her lunch, moving through the motions of the morning routine on autopilot. The sun was just beginning to peek through the window, casting long, pale shadows across the living room, just as I was. Buttering a piece of toast, a small, sleepy figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Morning, Mommy," Fiona mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Sweet Pea," I replied, forcing a smile. "Sleep well?" She nodded, still half asleep. "I'm gonna go play with Phoebe." She turned to head back to her room, her small hand reaching for the doorframe. But in her sleepy haze, she misjudged the distance. Her little finger got caught between the doorframe and the rapidly closing door. "Ow!" she yelped, a sharp, surprised cry. She pulled her hand back, her face crumpling as tears welled in her eyes. "My finger!" I rushed to her side, scooping her up. "Oh, sweetie, let Mommy see." I examined her finger, already red and starting to swell slightly. It wasn't broken, thankfully, but it was clearly painful. I kissed it gently. "Let's get some ice on that. No playing with Phoebe just yet, okay?" She nodded miserably, still sniffling, allowing me to carry her back towards her room, where I knew there was a small first aid kit. After putting ice on her finger for a couple minutes, she calmed down. I gave her a kiss on the forehead. I settled Fiona on the sofa with a cartoon for a few minutes, making sure the ice packs stayed put. then went back to the kitchen to finish packing her lunch and grab my purse. The house felt too quiet again, the kind of quiet that held its breath. I kept glancing toward the living room, a residual knot of anxiety still tight in my stomach. It was just a toy, I told myself. A very expensive, very glitchy toy. As I reached for my car keys, a high-pitched, saccharine voice drifted from the living room. It was Phoebe. The voice was perfectly clear, devoid of the metallic static from the night before, making it all the more unsettling. "Oh, poor sweet Fiona. That nasty door hurt you. Does Phoebe need to kiss the boo-boo on your finger? A special, very big kiss?" The words hung in the air, sickeningly sweet. Before Fiona could reply verbally, a sound ripped through the air, not a tearful whimper, but a sharp, panicked, animalistic scream of pure agony. "Mommy! No! It hurts! Get it off!" I dropped the keys, the sound swallowed by the sudden horrific noise. I sprinted back down the hall, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold dread flooding my mouth. I burst into the living room. Fiona was sitting on the floor, weeping hysterically, desperately pulling her arm away from the doll. Phoebe was tilted forward, leaning into Fiona's hand. Its plastic face was expressionless, its synthetic eyes wide and blue, but its sophisticated, articulated jaw, the one designed to simulate complex speech and chewing, was clamped down. It had bitten her. But it hadn't just nipped her. There was a sickening, wet crack squelch sound as I watched. The doll's internal motors whirred loudly, working hard against the resistance. Blood, bright arterial red, was pulsing and oozing out around the edges of the doll's mouth, coating the pristine white plastic in a horrific, slick glaze. Bones crunched and snapped under the pressure, and I could see a white nub sticking out from the red. Fiona's index finger was being actively pulverized. The mechanical teeth, designed for lifelike interaction, were now grinding with unfeeling, programmed precision. I could see the sickening result of that grinding. Tiny shards of bone and shredded pink-white tissue were visible, mixing with the thick, coppery blood that dripped onto the carpet. The doll was chewing, its mechanical jaw hinges flexing and straining as it worked its way through flesh and cartilage. The sheer, unthinking brutality of the attack, the cold, whirring mechanism destroying my daughter's body, paralyzed me for a split second. Then a guttural scream tore itself from my throat, a sound of pure maternal horror. I lunged forward, not thinking, just reacting. My hand slapped blindly against the doll's rigid plastic back, searching frantically for the recessed power switch. My fingers found the tiny nub. Click. The whirring stopped instantly. The jaw went slack. The blue eyes stared blankly. Phoebe released the mangled, ruined stub of Fiona's finger. Fiona didn't stop screaming. She only screamed louder, clutching the oozing, devastated ruin of her hand to her chest. I looked down at the doll's pristine cheek, now streaked with my daughter's blood, and the metallic, coppery smell of the damage filled the air. The doll lay silent, a grotesque, blood-spattered parody of a child. Its off switch flipped, leaving only the sound of my daughter's ragged, agonizing sobs. It was 10 minutes before we arrived at the emergency room. I brought the doll with me, but removed its batteries as I drove shakily. "It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay," I just kept saying like a damn mantra. She wailed and sobbed in the back seat. I demanded the emergency room staff see us immediately. She was bleeding out, God damn it. The doctors looked dumbfounded. They couldn't make any goddamn sense of it. There was no reason for the mechanical mouth of a doll to be strong enough to pulverize a human finger. They told me, begrudgingly, that they wouldn't be able to reattach it, but I already knew that. What I saw in the doll's mouth when I pulled it away didn't even resemble a finger anymore. They put her under anesthesia and stitched her finger up. She's left with a nub. A goddamn nub instead of a finger. And she's only 4 years old. It's been a few days since the incident. I've stayed home from work since then, watching over her and pampering her the best I can. I called the company that made the doll today and it went straight to voicemail. I tried every number of every goddamn factory, location, and HQ they had, and every time it went to voicemail. I'm at a loss. I'm fucking devastated. Fiona's condition has improved significantly, but if I can't stop remembering the sight of her finger being mauled by a goddamn doll, I'm sure she can't stop remembering how it felt. Reddit, please. Have you ever heard of this goddamn doll, or had any similar strange or terrifying experiences with a toy?